Good morning. Welcome to Woodstock Institute's Lunch and Learn Brown Bag on the Community Lending Fact Book and Data Portal, the 2020 Data Edition. I'm Spencer Cowan, Director of Research at Woodstock Institute. Get to work with a fabulous research team, and without any further ado, I'm actually going to turn it over to Amber Hendley.
I apologize for the delay. I lost my mouse. I have 3 screens, so sometimes that happens. I'm Amber Henley, Research Associate with Woodstock Institute, and now I'd like to turn it over to our research assistant, Natalie Chang, who will run through our presentation today.
Thanks, Amber. So I am now going to do the classic screen share. You know if you're not seeing my slides, if you're seeing my notes.
Looks good.
Good.
Looks good.
Okay. So welcome. Thank you all for being here. We are really excited that each one of you is here. You're an important part of the work that we're doing here in the research department here at Woodstock. And I hope that's an impression that you'll come away with strongly at the end of this conversation. So right here, you'll see a brief overview of what we're doing today. I'll start by talking about the data, where our data come from. Then we'll transition into looking at the fact book that we published and released this year for the 2020 data. And we'll spend the bulk of our time looking at our online data portal and how you might use that to analyze trends in your neighborhood or community. And then we will close by sharing some of the ways we're looking at expanding our work and fine-tuning it to better serve your communities and create effective change and equity. Also, please feel free to put any questions that you have throughout the presentation in the chat, and we'll have a time for question and answers at the end. So we'll address all of that at the end, but please, throughout the presentation, feel free to put anything in the chat if you have any questions. So where do our data come from? The data we would use at Woodstock for our fact book. There are 2 acts that the data come from, HMDA and CRA. These were passed to help remedy the effects of redlining, which was practice I'm sure you're all well familiar with, that discouraged lending in neighborhoods of color and resulted in a lot of patterns of disparity and under-resourced communities. And these legacies continue today through ongoing disparity in lending, investment, and access to financial goods and services. So HMDA stands for Home Mortgage Disclosure Act. This was passed in 1975, and it requires certain lenders of certain size to report lending data on basic information like applications, originations, and denials, but also additional information like customer demographics and statistics like loan to value ratio, debt to income ratio, and things. And the second, so that's where our mortgage data comes from. Then our small business data comes from the Community Reinvestment Act, or the CRA, which was passed in 1977. And that requires banks to meet the credit needs of their local communities, including low and moderate income neighborhoods, which are traditionally underserved. And banks are held accountable to this through the CRA, through exams and regular reviews. In 1995, small business, farm, and community development lending were added to the CRA. And so that's where our small business data comes from. A note here is that small business data is a lot less robust than the mortgage data. It's just total numbers and dollar amounts. And that's actually something we're working on in our policy department right now. is getting access to more detailed, robust data on small business lending. And we'll touch on that later in the presentation. So that's where the data come from. That's what the data are. Then we clean, analyze, and assess the data and turn it into the fact book, which is a print publication that we've printed every year since 1986, I believe. And it's also available as a PDF on the website. So what's in the fact book? There are 5 categories, each organized by geography. And the geographies we report on are 7-county region in and around Chicago, each county individually, Chicago alone, and then each of the 77 community areas in Chicago. So I'm not going to read through every single variable in every single category, because you can just look at them here and see what it looks like in the fact book next to it. But I will note a few things. So in our first section, demographics, population and homeownership, you'll see they're broken down by race and ethnicity. And this year we added gross rent and value, which are in the bottom right, those 2 pie charts. Second category we publish is mortgage lending data. So there are 2 tables for this. One is for lenders that must comply with CRA regulations. So the lenders that have to undergo those regular exams and reviews I mentioned earlier. And then the table below it is for lenders that are not subject to the CRA. And this is all mortgage lending. And everything here is broken down by race, ethnicity, and also LMI, low to moderate income borrowers. Next category is top lenders. So this is the top 20 lenders in each geography. And that top 20 figure is based on number of originations, so the second column. The data is broken down by dollar amount and total and percent. So what percent of all originations were purchase originations, or what percent of all applications were originations. And origination data is given for race and ethnicity, as well as low to moderate income categories. And then the final category is trends over time, 5-year trends over time. Origination data here is broken down by type, and we have number of originations and amount. For the owner-occupied home purchase lending, those are broken down by different income levels. And low income, the different tracks are based on a percent of the area median income, which is AMI. So low income is categorized as less than half the area median income. And then this last box here on the right, bank branches, this is new in the 2020 data fact book. I think I said final category last time. This is the final category. Small business loans. This is a total count and dollar amount of loans, and it's broken down by size of loan and then loans to businesses that fall under that small business category, which is gross revenue under $1 million. We also have active and vacant business addresses in that first chunk of columns. And the loan data is also given for just low to moderate income tracts within each geography, separated, as well as the whole geography overall. So this year we made a couple changes, which I've already hinted at and pointed out a few of them. And I will show you those, yes, on the next slide. So first we added a nice little map in the upper left corner so you can see where the geography is. And this is especially helpful for the community areas, I think. We added the gross rent and home value charts I mentioned earlier, and the bank branch data chart that I also mentioned earlier. And then that small business table that we were just looking at, that is all the geographies consolidated together in one table at the end, rather than within each geography's 2-page spread, mostly because if we stuck it at the end of that 2-page spread, it would go over 2 pages and it would not be a clean layout. And that would be very annoying. Okay, so that's the fact book, and that's the type of data we produce and analyze each year. So what did we find in the 2020 data edition in our analysis of that? Unfortunately, it's more of the same inequity we've been tracking and fighting for decades, and literally more, because there's greater disparity and greater inequity. First, a bit of context. Overall, in 2020, mortgage activity increased. We saw applications and loan originations both go up over 50 and 60% in the whole 7-county region. And this was primarily driven by an explosion in refinance originations. In that whole 7-county region, refinance originations were up 140% and 120% in Chicago. And as a total dollar amount of all originations, it was an increase of 50 to 64% in the 7-county region and in Chicago, respectively, from 2019 to 2020. So with this growth in mortgage activity, what do we see? Greater disparity. Though I know you're all probably well aware of this, the city of Chicago is very racially segregated. So on the north side, it's a predominantly white population. It's about 70% white, only 7% Black, and a little less than a third Latino. And then the south and west sides are much more diverse. South side's over 50% Black, also a third Latino. The west side's 40% Black and quarter Latino. So we have much more diverse south and west sides. So with that in mind, if we look at loan amounts and lending in these different areas, we can get a picture of equity in terms of lending in Chicago. So in 2020, the average loan amount on the north side increased 47%, on the south side 43%, and on the west side 30%. So these trends obviously differ at face value, but if we put them in the context of where the gap already was between these loan amounts, these unequal changes show just how much the disparity widened even more. So with these changes, the average loan amount on the south side dropped to just 31% of the average loan amount on the north side. On the south side, the average loan amount dropped to just 3/4 of the average loan amount on the north side. And you can see, for a bit more context, each area's share of Chicago's overall population, so how big it is relative to the city, and then how much of the total dollar amount of lending they received in 2020. And you'll see that on the south side, that share of loan amount is way lower than their share of the total population. And on the north side, that share is way higher. And then again, more the same disparity in originations and denial rates. We see lower rates of originations and higher rates of denials for Black and Latino populations. And in the whole region overall, Blacks and Latinos have rates 15 and 10% lower than whites, and denial rates for Blacks are nearly twice as high as whites, and for Latinos about 1.5 times as high. So those are the 2020 data trends we wanted to pull out and highlight. It's the same story again, disparity and inequity, as I said several times, and it bears worth repeating. Underserved communities of color and lack of access to resources and financial capital is linked to opportunity. And we know that community members, you guys, are the people that know your communities the best. And we also know that this data has power. So in an effort to link those two powerful sources of change and more effectively put this data in the places where it will make the most change, which is you, in your hands, we put together an online data portal last year with the release of our 2019 data factbook in the hopes of doing just that. So what's in the data portal? How does it differ from the factbook? Well, it has all of the same information as the factbook, but it is the factbook 2.0. So there's better interactability. It's easier to click through different tabs and find different stats you're looking for. And it's also easier to change geographies. You can click and choose which geography you're looking for rather than flipping at the table of contents, finding the page number, and going back and forth that way. And you'll see all this when we go through the demo in just a minute. The huge thing that we're really excited about with the data portal is accessible. So anyone can access it. It's free. It's online, so you can access it on your phone, on your whatever electronic device you have. And you can download and print the data for your own use as well. So that key ability to be able to put it in your hands and have you use it yourself. So let's get into it. How can we use the data portal and what might that look like? So I'm going to demo an example. We're going to look at North Lawndale and Lincoln Park. So North Lawndale is a predominantly Black community on the west side. Lincoln Park's a predominantly white community on the north side. And we'll compare trends between the two areas to demonstrate some of the inequity I was discussing earlier. Okay, so I am going to do a switcheroo of my screen share so we can go to the data portal. Also, I keep data, tomato. I definitely use both interchangeably. And okay. Are you seeing my screen with the two?
Looks good. Yep.
Okay. Let's do this. Good.
Sorry. Yeah, it looks good. If you want to zoom in, you could even if you want to, you could zoom in, but it looks great.
Okay. I think we'll leave it here because I'll be switching through different tabs. So this is what the data, I'm going to go with data for now. This is what the data portal looks like. On the left, I have North Lawndale selected. On the right, I have Lincoln Park. So we'll just start by looking at each neighborhood, a little bit about their demographics. As I mentioned, North Lawndale is predominantly Black. You can see that in this chart right here on the bottom left. I'm assuming you can see my mouse. And also for a bit of context, North Lawndale is smaller than Lincoln Park. It's about 35,000, population about 35,000, which is a little over half the size of Lincoln Park. North Lawndale is mostly lower income. You can see that in the second pie chart. Lincoln Park is mostly higher income. In the occupancy chart, we'll see that there's more renters. There are more renters in North Lawndale, though not by much. Lincoln Park is still about half renter occupied. And So that's a little, like if you were just interested in basic demographics about your neighborhood, that's what you could get from this first tab. We'll dive deeper now into the housing data. So here on the neighborhood overview tab, we also have these two charts, which are new this year. I mentioned that earlier, probably twice. The home value in Lincoln Park or in North Lawndale, much lower than the average home value in, or the breakdown of home value in Lincoln Park. And same with gross strength. Another piece of housing data we could look at is foreclosures. So if we switch to the foreclosure tab at the top, we see the same general overall decline in foreclosures in both areas. But if we look a little closer at this, we find some interesting information. So we know that North Lawndale is smaller than Lincoln Park. So, oh, this is not on Lincoln Park. So we know that North Lawndale is smaller than Lincoln Park, and it follows too that North Lawndale has fewer housing units than Lincoln Park overall, about half the amount. And as a share of all units in Chicago, that's 1/3 the amount that Lincoln Park has. Overall, we see that downward trend, but if we look at these numbers more closely and do a little math, we find that even though North Lawndale has about 1/3 the share of housing units as Lincoln Park, it has twice the share of all foreclosures in the city. So 1/3 share of all housing units in the city and twice the share of foreclosure in the city compared to Lincoln Park, which is pretty significant. So then you might be interested in just looking at lending trends overall, more generally, to understand the financial environment and how money is flowing in your community. So what kinds of questions could we answer there? For one, we could look at how many bank branches are in our community. So in North Lawndale, we have, in 2020, we have 1. And in Lincoln Park in 2020, we have 25. So again, we know Lincoln Park's bigger, but obviously not 25 times bigger. Another piece of information we could look at is top lenders in our neighborhood. So what are the trends in lending for the institutions that are doing the most lending in each neighborhood? Before we talk about these numbers, it's important to know that online lenders are not regulated by the federal CRA right now. So if we look at just the top 5 lenders in each neighborhood and do a little research or based on our previous knowledge, we'll quickly see that there are more online lenders for top lenders in Lincoln Park or North Lawndale than there are in Lincoln Park. So what does that mean? There's more non-CRA regulated mortgage lending happening in North Lawndale than there is in Lincoln Park. And this has implications for enforcing fair lending and equitable access to capital in these neighborhoods. And it's also why the Illinois CRA, which was recently passed, is so crucial because it does regulate online lending and cover those online lenders. And okay, that's just top lenders. What about mortgage lending specifically? The numbers. Yes, the numbers for mortgage lending. So first, we'll just look at the banks that are regulated by the CRA. And we'll see that the average loan amount right here is much higher in Lincoln Park. It's more than 3 times that of North Lawndale, which is 205 compared to 740K. Also, the origination rate in North Lawndale is a lot lower, 33% compared to 58%. And the denial rate in North Lawndale is about twice as high as in Lincoln Park. Nope. Yes, North Lawndale has twice as high a denial rate than Lincoln Park. So this means that residents in North Lawndale are getting way smaller mortgages at way lower rates than residents in Lincoln Park. And then just to get a taste of what's going on for non-CRA regulated lenders, we look at originations here. We can do a little math, and we see that as a percent of overall mortgages in each neighborhood, mortgages from non-CRA regulated lenders make up about 3/4 of all mortgages in North Lawndale and only about half of all mortgages in Lincoln Park. So again, those non-regulated mortgage lenders are primarily those online lenders that we saw in the top lending category. Okay, so that's a snapshot of this data and what you can pull out of it and analyze for your community and your interests. And we only scratch the surface here of what we could do, which really mirrors what we at Woodstock aim to do with the data portal, which is start conversations and give momentum to the work community members you guys are doing to create equity. I am going to switch back to this screen. Are you seeing the slideshow?
Yes.
All right. So yeah, as I was saying, our goal with the data portal is to equip you with the information and tools you need to create the change you want and to work with you toward that change, whether it's just through the data that you see on the portal or a closer working relationship between us both. And the goal would be that the whole system is collaborating in a process of reporting and presenting data to tailor it to what communities actually need and want. And so with that, I'm going to transition to Amber, who is going to talk a little more about how we're working to do just that.
Thank you, Natalie. Wonderful presentation. So Natalie has mentioned this multiple times. You know, just after decades of community reinvestment, we're still trying to change Chicago's hyper-segregated map. If you overlay red line maps, the HOLC maps over present day, if we look at health outcomes, economic outcomes, we see literally the same map. So last year, Woodstock kind of just launched this Change the Map, and we continue to do that work. Our ambition is still to change the map. So the work that we're doing informs that process. Our research that we do, we continue to do the research that Chicago relies on, and then branch out and identify ways that we can extend our data to connect to all other aspects of the outcomes in LMI communities, or for LMI people. So we look also at communities as a whole, but also we look at the individual LMI consumers. So what we will do is we will ensure insights from our data analysis, provide actionable information. We're focused on providing actionable information that informs meaningful change. So we are regularly meeting with community-based institutions, block clubs on the ground, community development corporations, housing counseling agencies, community development corporations. And we are building our next iteration of the data portal based off of feedback and what is being asked of us from these on the ground grassroots organizations. So things that we can look forward to sooner than later, because we're working to push out the next iteration of this data portal to include maps. That is a request that we've been getting. We added it to the fact book, and now we're going to add it in a more dynamic fashion to our data portal. Timelines. people want to understand what has happened over time. What growth has there been and where have we gone backwards? We want comparisons. So whether that is between the north side and the south side or specific community areas, we will incorporate a feature that allows you to compare, or if you want to know how you did 10 years ago. And we want to include more variables. So HMDA has a lot more variables for us to include, but we're collaborating with other policy institutes and think tanks to figure out how do we connect data that is housed in other places, that it all tells the same story. We all need each other to help change the map. So we are figuring out what variables to include and to incorporate. We are working with you. So everyone on this call, if we have not met, you and I, Natalie, Spencer, our team, if we have not connected, we will be doing so. We will be reaching out to you to do so, and asking that you connect us with anybody you think could use our analysis. What we hope to do is to create mini Woodstocks across the city. So we don't have to be the end all be all. We just want to provide that access and that information, and to provide to meet the need to change this map. We also provide technical assistance. And currently, I think Natalie talked about our small business lending, or our small business data. Our policy team is working on a bill that would give small business the truth in lending rights that we have for the HMDA data. So we want to build out our small business, because we also know that entrepreneurship and small business is a major wealth building opportunity for LMI communities. And we need to lift that up, and we need to understand where the investments need to be made. So the goal of this is to identify where do the investments need to be made and make the connections to get those needs met. Next slide, Natalie. What's our next slide? So now that you know what we're working on, what we've been working on, and what we will be building out, what are your thoughts? We would like to address any questions that we didn't in the chat, but I think we only had that one. And Vanessa had part of her question, which was, so for the lower loan origination rate among Black people and Latinos, is that across all different loan types? So Natalie, when we did that connection, or when we built that calculation, the origination rate, is that across all different loan types? You did, I assume you calculated based off of all of them and not just CRA.
Yeah, so this is overall for Blacks and Latinos, origination and denial rates for, the mortgage applications. And that breakdown at the bottom is 50 and 56% versus 65%. Blacks and Latinos versus white. Denials you can see below.
And so we open to any other questions or comments, because this does conclude our formal presentation on the data portal for 2020, as well as the fact book.
Or anything on the data portal that you're thinking would be useful to add, useful to take away, increase user friendliness.
So Emily has asked about our rental data and wants to know what was our data source, which was ACS. We used the census data for the rents, for the gross amount.
Yes, for the rental payments and for the renter homeownership breakdown as well. A question, did you have percents somewhere? I didn't see it. Percent denied versus numbers. Yes, that is in the fact book. There are columns that show the total amount, and then in parentheses, it shows the percent of all applications, or if we're looking at different types of originations. It shows the percent of all originations. So the breakdown for a lot of variables is by percent and total number.
Then we had, a lot has been said about the appraisal gap. Is there a way to track how homes are appraised across neighborhoods? This is something that we're looking to capture. So we welcome like the conversation about the best way to do that, because that's something that we want to include.
One of the ways that we can begin to get at that is to look at the reasons for denials. Right now, we haven't put that in the fact book or on the data portal. The fact book, because it's physically limited in space. As Natalie pointed out, if we start to add stuff to, the small business data or whatever, it takes it over to 3 pages per community area, and suddenly the fact book gets to be an encyclopedia. It's physically too large. We hope to be able to put that on the website, on the data portal, because that's not space limited. And looking at the reason for denial. If it's collateral, that means that the property didn't appraise for enough to support what the mortgage request was. So we can start to get at it, but in terms of what the actual appraisal is, that's a little more difficult.
Also, I will just circle back a little bit to that technical assistance. So if there's something that's more specific to your community that you're interested in looking at, that might be, the reasons for or the nitty gritty more on appraisal differences might be something that we could look at together and dive deeper into the data on together.
And something Natalie didn't mention, technical assistance is free to community groups. We get supported to provide it. So we offer it at no charge.
Then we have Liza, when will we likely begin to see the new CRA reporting required of online lenders under the Illinois CRA, given that it just went into effect in January?
Sounds like a question for Jane Doyle, possibly.
I was going to say,
If
is
you're
Brent
still
here?
on.
Is Jane here?
I think Jane is on. I'm not sure.
Or Horacio?
I am on. Sorry, what was the question?
Question is, when will we likely begin to see the new CRA reporting required of online lenders under the Illinois CRA, given that it just went into effect in January?
So that's still in the process of rulemaking. And it's kind of tied into the federal CRA rulemaking process. I would hope sometime next year, but we're still not sure exactly.
And Horacio responded to John Boyle that we're doing something similar for Massachusetts, and we're happy to help in Pittsburgh with the condition. He's requesting that you change your stadium name back to Heinz Fields.
If I had that power, I would be more than happy to do that. Also, the caveat being, I'm actually an Eagles fan, but hey, we're not all perfect.
Okay, now we won't help.
I actually had a kind of a secondary follow-up. Excuse me if I missed this. I know you were talking about the small business data earlier, and I think you were kind of alluding to some of the Section 1071 future changes. Any thoughts on when that might take place, as well as how the federal CRA NPR might affect what you're doing here going forward?
I can give you the pessimistic assessment of 1071 that I have been working on for close to a decade, trying to get 1071 rules promulgated so that we could start to get the data. I'm hoping that we will get it sometime in the next couple of years. And as for changes in HMDA reporting and the proposed rules for CRA, again, I'm not sure. These processes seem to take a long time. I was going to say forever, but I thought I'd be optimistic.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, so Rose is asking, how do you define equity in all of this? That's a really good question. Who wants to take, do you want me to take that? Spencer, do you want to take that?
I think equity is something that each of us might have a slightly different definition of. I would say it's not what we have now. It's something where people have a reasonable approximation of a fair chance to get approved.
And in some of the work that we're doing with community members, I think we define so not looking for equality per se, but equity based on what a community area says that they want or what their need is. So working to understand what each community area, what these LMI or predominantly Black or Brown community areas want or need. Starting there, understanding again what the ask is from the community or from the individuals, and then building towards that. So, right, I don't think that we're trying to get the South Side to look like the North Side, because the South Side has different needs, and it's understanding what the need is of the South Side and what it is that where they're trying to go, or the West Side, where are they trying to go, and working to help get them there. So I think that's how we're looking at equity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like Amber said, it's I think we all would probably agree it's not about equalizing all the numbers, but the numbers show us and are indicative of inequity. And then from there, that's where we start conversations. It's a launching pad toward, okay, what's driving this and what can we do to reach those goals, reach those outcomes that you want, the access to resources and opportunity that you want and need to live the lives that you deserve to live as a human being.
Thank you. Dignity. I think that's what we're working towards is equal dignity, and then equity. Nicole is asking, are you able to guess how much of these loan originations are going towards properties where the owner resides there versus rents out of the property? So we actually focused on owner occupying with our HMDA analysis. So our numbers don't get at second homes or investment properties.
Well, actually, Amber, we don't disaggregate on the report that we do, but there is a indicator for whether it's for a principal residence or secondary or investment property. So those can be separated out. That said, a lot of people seem to put down principal residence when it might not be. So it's not 100% accurate.
Thank you, Spencer, for that correction. And then we had Lewis for official CFPB position on 1071 timing. Oh, thank you for this. They have said they'll publish final rule no later than March, and there will be an 18-month period to come into compliance. Of course, litigation or something like that could impact it. Thank you for sharing that. Then we have, how do we put our need in policy and law? That's from Rose asking the great question. So how do we put our need in policy and law? So I think, Horacio, did you have a comment?
Oh, no, I want to hear what you're going to say.
Okay. So again, like having the conversations, making the assessments, understanding what the ask is, it's easy to make the connections to some type of policy or a particular area. And so first you have to understand what the need is, but then you make the connection. That takes the research and then the policy, like the experts in policy, to identify, well, what is the person actually saying? They're saying that their need is they don't have healthy foods. So then we know that that's disinvestment of some type. Well, what type of disinvestment? So you just take the need and you trace it to the policy or the law, because there's a direct line. There's a direct line. You just have to have the patience and the access to the information to find it. We take those needs and then we identify what is that policy concern. So that's basically how you do it. You have to go through and figure out what does that track to.
Oh, and our approach is a bit bookended. So the data portal, or as Natalie calls it, the data portal, starts with the idea that we have to be able to identify the prioritized needs at the community level, as opposed to having well-intentioned outsiders or elected officials determine what the needs are and make a lot of assumptions. And from there, we can work at the grassroots level and at the community level to try to figure out whether or not it's a regulatory issue, if it's a policy issue or legislative, if it's a best practice from industry doing business there or otherwise. On the other end, though, also is there are no lack of laws or regulations or policies that are intended to address this issue of equity. The challenge is they've just been horribly or not enforced at all. So at the high end, and with help from people like Calvin Bradford and others, we're trying to make sure that's what's on the book to be able to address these issues is actually being enforced in a manner that makes them work. And then at the granular level, at the community level, giving everybody the data and the information they need to advocate for what their community needs. And hopefully somewhere in the middle, we'll be able to have that sweet spot where need is actually both enshrined, enforced, and implemented appropriately in policy. You're welcome.
And Tom is saying, one thing to watch for with online mortgage lenders newly covered by your state CRA. In Massachusetts, their division of banks cited a number of mortgage companies for data quality issues with HMDA. They had a lack of confidence that the mortgage companies were submitting accurate information when their law first went into effect.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Tom. Even financial institutions that have been covered by the Home Mortgage Disclosure Act since the mid-1970s have a challenge in submitting accurate data to the degree that there are multiple resubmissions associated with a period of time before a CRA exam, because the validation and the sampling by the examiners realize that there isn't a high percentage of confidence that the data is accurate. So you can imagine mortgage companies that aren't used to this, or they don't have a large compliance team, or they really don't give a crap if they submit bad data. That can be a challenge. So that's something that we'll work closely with our state regulatory agency, IDFPR, the Illinois Department of Financial and Professional. I always forget if it's financial and professional or professional and financial, but irrespective, we're going to have to work with them to make sure that that kind of technical assistance as well as enforcement is in place to make sure the data that we have is actually reflective of accurate information. All right. Anything else for the good of the order?
Just gonna say the same, well, not exactly that way, but yeah, any other questions or comments? Well, thank you all of you again for being here. I think Amber put our contact information in the chat earlier. So you can scroll back up through to get that, but I think we can also send it later when we send the presentation as well. So you'll have access to us through our emails.
And I
So
also wanted to thank Gordon for coordinating and being the MC and keeping us on track. So you've heard him. I'm sure you know who he is, but if you don't, that's the person that's been keeping us in line.
yes, thank you for your technical facilitation. All
Thanks,
right.
everyone.
Thank you all for being here.